there's too much competition or there's too many smart people out there figuring out better ways to do it. And you've either got to keep up or you're going to be out of the game.
Sharp Strategies, Sweet Success. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. This is Sharp Strategies, Sweet Success, and this is Tiffany Swedensky. Today, we're talking to Jim Parrish of the Parrish Law Firm in Manassas, Virginia. I've known Jim for a long time because when I worked at Ben Glass Law, I tracked his website because it almost always outperformed ours. And then when I started Sharp Cookie, Jim was one of the first attorneys to reach out to me. And we initially did a marketing audit together and then started to work together. And I've been working as his fractional CMO ever since, which has been just absolutely awesome. Jim is really an interesting guy. He's into fitness and self-care and all that good stuff, which I really like about him. And I really like the way he runs his firm, very principled in terms of execution and just laser focused on the goals and what we want to get done. I really appreciated that about him. But that's my little intro to Jim, so I'll turn it over to him to have him finish it up.
Well, so as you said, Tiffany, my name is Jim Parrish, and I do run the Parrish Law Firm here in Manassas. We also have an office in Fairfax. Vast majority of the cases we handle, involve motor vehicle collisions, probably 95% of them, and that would be everything from car crash to car versus pedestrian, bicyclist, those sorts of things. We are getting more into the world, as you know, of commercial motor vehicle collisions. Not as many of those, obviously, as the regular car crash case, but we're hoping to land more of those cases because they're quite interesting and, of course, can be quite fruitful. On the personal side, a husband of almost 25 years, and I have 2 children. My daughter is a junior at West Virginia University, just turned 21. And my son is a senior in high school. He's 18, and he's actually on his way to visit his sister right now for the weekend.
And where's she going to college at again?
She goes to West Virginia University, WVU.
So one of the first questions I had for you, Jim, and if you just wouldn't mind sharing, what are the things that you're working on within your law firm right now where you're trying to make a big difference?
So what we're trying to do is better track and trace, various aspects of the case life. So we're into the KPI zone, so to speak. And so we actually declared April KPI month, and so we started with a fairly finite group of them so that we're not trying to track too much and get too much into the weeds of it, but I think that's going to be a helpful tool for us as we progress because we have a ever increasing case volume, and with that volume, we have to turn the cases over. And so we have to make sure that people are following the systems and the processes that we put into place. And so I think those KPIs are going to allow us to look at things and say, okay, where's the holdup? What can we do to jiggle that part free? And sometimes it's a lack of procedure in, one area. A lot of times it's me, I'm the holdup because I'm, the attorney who has to answer all the questions and do all those kinds of things. So I'm really hopeful that, everyone in the firm is going to buy into it, and understand that it's not a way of doing gotcha, or something. It's just, hey, how can we improve this? And say our numbers last month were this month, these are the numbers, they improved. Why? Or they were lesser numbers. Why? So it's just information that can be of assistance.
So did everyone at the law firm get a KPI or 2 or 3 KPIs, or how many is it per person?
It's really only about 1, per person. And we break that down, and I guess I should say per person, it's more like per area, so we have me as the attorney, we have my wife who does the case closings, we have intake, we have medical records, and then we have case managers. And so each area, has a specific KPI associated with it. And we will add more as we increase, but I just said, let's start simple. Let's start basic. Let's start with something that we can actually stick to, and move forward from there.
Did everyone get to pick their own KPIs and what they measured, or did you assign it?
They were voluntold what their KPI would be. I picked them out, but I took them from articles that I had read. I think maybe even one was from something that you had read. So it's nothing that's out of the ordinary. It's all the standard stuff in an injury law firm. What's the average case length? What's the average case value? How long does it take to get out of demand once treatment's in? How long does it take once, you issue the demand and get the first offer and that kind of thing? How long from the time it's sent to the closing department until the money's actually distributed? Things like that.
And how are you handling this stuff where you're the bottleneck? And I'm not trying to this isn't a hard hitting interview. I'm not trying to get you in anything, but honestly, for myself, that's a struggle, as a business owner in my own area. It's oh, there's so many things I'm the bottleneck for. How do I pick what goes to somebody else?
Well, what it does for me is I look at it and say, okay, am I not working enough? Am I not working hard enough? Or do I need more help? And usually it's I need more help. And so that is one of the things with which we have struggled, and that is finding, another attorney to be here full time, and something that we're seeking to fill a position in relation to that need. But otherwise the answer for me has been work more, or work harder.
Well, that's always so tough because there are only so many hours in the day and there are so many things that are important. And I think for most business owners, they're usually not the person who had an issue with working hard before. A business owner works hard by their nature. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have become an entrepreneur. But I do think it's an important question to ask because, there's always a time where you just oh, I phoned that in, or I didn't put as much effort into that as I should have. And so the answer is sometimes you need to buckle down and work a little harder. But I think for people like you and people like me, maybe it's also about who can I hire? Who can I delegate to?
Yeah, well, over the last few months, I've been busier than I've been in years, and when I was in my early 30s, it wasn't as much of a challenge as it is today in my early 50s. And so I work with a performance psychologist who's a sports psychologist by trade. So he works with all kinds of professional athletes and stuff. And I was talking to him about it, and I was like, man, I don't know that I really want to be this busy. And he said, well, run through it for a few months. He said, and figure out if you were just kind of out of shape, or if it's really not what you want to do. And so as the last few months have developed, I kind of figured out that I was a little bit out of shape, and now that being said, I don't want to run at this pace for another 10 years. And so I still am looking for somebody to take some of the weight, off my shoulders.
Yeah, and I did this in the last podcast I recorded, but ended up going into using gym analogies and workout analogies for things. But it is just like working out. It's are you not very good at that exercise, or are you just not in shape at all and need to work up to it? And, it's do you avoid it or do you tackle it? And that's an important choice to make when you're dealing with some issues like this.
Well, yeah, certainly if it's, something that on which you need to improve, then yeah, you either got to do it yourself, and figure out how to do it better, or find somebody who can do it better than you, who likes doing it, and that you can pay a sum that's reasonable. And then it gives you back, more time to work on things you want to work on, so that again, that's the challenge.
And I think mentally that can be tough because I think, well, at least I do, tend to think that other people are like myself. And so if I don't like doing something, I have a hard time imagining the individual who does like doing it.
Right.
But, they are out there. There is somebody who, even if they don't want to do it for the rest of their lives, maybe it's a task they want to do now to get the experience to learn because, sometimes you have to toil in it in that way. But we're limited by our own imaginations in terms of like who's out there and who's available to help. And a lot of times there is that person, there is somebody who wants to do that stuff.
Well, I know when I started, in this practice almost 30 years ago, I wanted to, take depositions all the time, and I was willing to go to court and argue motions, and because I started at an insurance defense firm, and so it was like 17 lawyers. The people always had things they could hand off, and I was always like, give it to me, give it to me, I'll do it, But now it's like the bane of my existence, right? I don't, I don't need to ask somebody the same questions over and over and over, I've done hundreds, if not thousands of times. But there are certainly people that want to make their bones, and do these things and get the experience, that I have now. So just have to find that person.
Yeah. And it's the difference between like, do you want to write, your 400th article on personal injury attorney near me, that SEO article for the website, or do you want to, move on to the next thing? My listeners are going to be mad at me because I used two of the same analogies back to back podcasts, if anyone picked up on it. So as far as like the KPI, or April is KPI month, what got you there? Like what made you say like we need to do this in April?
Well, again, our case volume has increased a great deal over the last, couple of years. Part of that's from working with you, and when you have more cases, you have more employees, you have more expenses. And so, the goal is to try and have as steady an income pattern as you can have. And as you well know, in a personal injury practice, the income can be like this, quite frequently. But, the more reading that I've done and study, it became clear to me that if you just start continuing to do the same things and push them forward, that you can steady out, that income stream. And so the only way to do it is by measuring things. And historically, we've been very bad at that because we've always had plenty of money. We've always had plenty of cases, but with this number and this number of team members, it, again, just became clear that we need to do a better job of it. And part of that also came from being involved in, a mastermind group where other people were doing it, and talking about it. And so I saw the light.
Yeah. So many things are like that, where you have to see somebody else doing it to realize like, oh, that is important. That is super worthwhile. And, something with KPIs that's always been a struggle, particularly with individuals, is just everyone staying on the same system, doing it consistently. Because, what's tough is like when the boss, stops paying attention, sometimes it just stops happening. And all of a sudden you have 2 or 3 months without KPI numbers.
Yeah.
And so, it's important to automate and get everyone's buy-in, but also just like follow through on these things. And something that you said earlier, if you continue to market and you continue to push, the numbers will even out, it will get a little bit smoother over time, but you don't get there without, pushing and pushing and pushing and just staying with it, which is, a really important part of marketing, business, everything else.
Well, and I think that kind of goes into, a lot of lawyers don't look at what they do as a business, and they think of it as, more of an art, it's a higher calling, but at base, it's a business and it should be run like a business. And that is, almost the exact opposite of, the law firm that I started at, where we had a lot of great trial lawyers, but they didn't know anything about business, or at least I don't think they knew much, because they didn't focus on the numbers. It was handle this case and do this and do that, and then the money will come, and maybe in the old days, that's the way it worked, but it doesn't work that way now. There's too much competition, or there's too many smart people out there figuring out better ways to do it. And you've either got to keep up or you're going to be out of the game.
So I guess I was thinking about it the other day, and I know a few people when I was in high school and college who were going to be lawyers.
Sure.
And if you talk to them about it, they were really like helping people, wanting to make a difference, maybe even going into politics later. And then like I think about like what I do now, which is working with the lawyers and the lawyers I work with. And I almost feel kind of bad because like for those that went into it, with that help people mindset, I'm sure they are helping people. They're helping a lot of people. But, the reality of like what how to be successful in the practice of law versus like what inspired you to go into it. Sometimes it's a little bit different, and I feel bad. And it might be the way for every profession too. Like marketing, you think you're going to be doing creative stuff your whole career, writing copy, making videos, but at the end of the day, it's systems, it's growth, it's metrics, it's business. And, some people are into that and like it and stay in it. And some people, find something else or stay employees where they can do, the part of it that's art, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I see lots of, the same lawyers in the courthouse, and they're doing the exact same thing they were doing 25, 30 years ago. They're doing court appointed work. They're doing low level, you know, cases, and they're very, very busy, but they haven't made a lot of money. And I'm not saying money is the end all be all, but, I don't think that they treat it like a business. And that's fine. If that's the way you want to do things and that's what makes you happy, then great. That's the beautiful thing about this country. You can do whatever you want to do, as long as you're making enough to pay the bills. But I didn't look at the law, as this higher calling. I looked at it as a way to help people, but also be able to take care of myself and my family and my employees. And I really think that a lot of lawyers lose sight of some of those items and focus solely on, the cases and, doing things that takes away from their personal lives. They miss out on birthday parties and, family events. And I've just never practiced that way. I coached my kids in almost every sport, in which they participated. And I was typically coaching at least 2 teams per season. I coached a total of 36 youth sports teams, while they were playing. And I was always involved. Even when I couldn't coach, I was volunteering, doing video and setting things up because I wanted to be present, with them and not look back when they were older and say, oh man, I was slogging away on the Johnson case during that. That to me, it's an easy choice,
Yeah.
spend the time with the family, get your stuff together at the office, but separate the two.
It's almost like the great irony of it because you get into something because you want to help people, because you want to make art, because you want to do, some other higher calling type thing. But then you learn like to be able to do more of that and more of the stuff you want, you have to get really ruthless about the business and about the money, which is
Mhm.
unappealing. Um, but if you want a life where you can make your own schedule, where you can be present with your kids, you have to you almost have to go that route because otherwise, you're going to keep doing the same things every day and not really grow beyond the thing that you originally started with, which I think, that's honestly kind of sad to me. The idea of doing something for 25 years, if I'm being honest.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. One of my mentors, a guy that I respect greatly as a lawyer, you know, he would work all day, go home, have dinner with his family, and then go back to the office, and then get up and do it again, and get up and do it again, and get up and do it again. And I looked at it and I said, "There's no way, that's not living." Now, he liked it. I don't know what his family thought about it. I'm gonna guess, what his family thought about it, but he, liked it, and so he was making his choices. That's just not the choice for me.
Yeah. No, my husband's kind of going through that because right now his commute is like 1 hour there and 1 hour back. And
Yeah.
he hates it. And I feel him. I feel him. But I
Mhm.
feel him from the place of I never have to commute.
And he
So
just
I kind of love my job and it's like, yeah, it'll work itself out. Other than KPI April, what else is going on that's new at your firm or what's something that you're planning that you're excited about?
well, May is going to be a review month.
Oh,
What we're trying to do is like every small business person, you have like 100 irons, irons in the fire, and then stuff just doesn't get done. And so a couple of weekends ago, I was looking back at stuff and I said, all right, we've been talking about doing these things. We're going to focus on one thing per month and we're going to get it, in shape. And then we'll move on to the next thing. And so May is review month. And so I told, the whole team, I said, I'm going to incentivize everybody here. They're getting a monetary award if they get a review done that has their name in it, you know, and I'm hopeful that we're going to, surpass, a goal of ours in terms of, reviews appearing on Google and so forth by getting, the team involved. Because before, again, that's probably me as a bottleneck, right? Because I'm the only one sending out the emails to people, but if I can get everybody to buy in and then, they're getting, something out of it as well, then I think it's going to succeed.
yeah. The lead attorney is always the most efficient at getting reviews. There's almost nobody who can get reviews as good consistently than the business owner. But when you need it in volume, it always comes from the team. It always comes from everyone participating and asking for reviews and just getting in the habit of doing that.
Mhm.
Because Morgan and Morgan, on some of their profiles have like 3,000 plus reviews. They didn't get there just by John Morgan asking for reviews. There's a process for everyone to do it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, I look around at, some of our competitors and this, we talked about it, how does that guy have, 225 reviews? And I've been doing this longer than him and I know I've had more clients than him. And it's because we've been poor at it, right? And so it's one of the times you have to look in the mirror and say, okay, you suck. You need to do better. And so that's the plan that I've created so that hopefully we don't suck as bad.
I was recently thinking about how funny it is. I don't think I have any reviews on Sharp Cookie's business profile because I'm only solicited testimonials and it's like, oh, I'll put them on the website, but I haven't really. I've done that 0, so I'm technically worse at it than you. It helps you at all. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. Maybe that's something I need to work on. Um, well, so working on reviews, and then I know you're working with somebody who's a nearshore marketer. You and I both work with him, Luis for.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how you're just leveraging that talent to help, fill these gaps at your firm?
Yeah, sure. So we used a worker, in Mexico a couple of years ago, and it was a disaster. The person just didn't work out. I'm not saying that she was a bad person, but it just did not work. And then I heard about another company that offered those kinds of services, and I was much more diligent, in my, background search and vetting, of her business. And right now we have 5, remote workers as part of the team. One of those is Luis and, he does marketing and he works obviously closely with you. I mean, and he's remarkably talented. And, we do Teams meetings and, an email, and there's really no issues with it at all. It's much more seamless than I thought it would or could be, and we have remote caseworkers. Now that has required me, to teach them a great deal, as well as my lead case manager, who's been with us for 14 years. She spent a lot of time teaching them as well, but they're very interested, and they're very diligent and they work really hard. And so that's been a part of the growth that we've had, is that they've been helping us push these cases along and provide, great service to the client. So, I intend to keep growing that team.
And I think it must be the future. I don't know for sure, but it must be the future because I mean it's hard to find talent, here in the US sometimes, particularly if you're looking for high level talent with a good like a specialty or a niche. Like Luis Fur is incredible at design and video
Mhm.
and copy and really good at putting together these marketing reports. I've learned a good deal from him,
Mhm.
if I'm being frank. And he's just fantastic employee, really dedicated to it. And I just can't see I just feel like a lot of small businesses are going to start going that route, and it'll be a competition for talent, for people near shore. But I honestly, like, it's kind of revolutionized marketing too, because used to we'd only hire, somebody local, native English speaker, because that's what we needed. But ChatGPT and all these other things have just kind of broken down those communication barriers, and it's a lot more viable than it used to be for sure.
Well, I was talking to somebody yesterday who's another small business owner, and I was telling him about the remote team, and he was like, "Really? It works?" And I said, "It works great." And I said, "It's just funny, the legal industry many times is so far behind other businesses because we're stuck in these traditions, most of which are BS. And so, for example, I have one of my closest friends is the senior VP of technology for a huge bank, and they've been using offshore talent for 20 years. He's got teams in Pakistan, he's got teams in India, and all over the world. And so this is not something that's new. It's just relatively new, probably to the small law firm, and it's again because people are fearful, and they think nobody's ever done that. So, maybe it's unethical. Maybe there's an issue with it, or, this, that, or the other. But I can tell you firsthand that it works, then it works well.
Oh yeah. Um, and and I feel like as a business, and maybe I'll eat my words or eat my hat in a year or so, but I feel like I'll always probably have at least one or a handful US based employees, because strengths and weaknesses, the offshore teams, nearshore teams have strengths and weaknesses, and so do the US based employees.
Mhm.
But for me, I don't see that like going away. Like I don't envision my company as being 100% nearshore. But
Mhm.
like certainly when I think about growing, like I'm like it would be really easy to do this, nearshore, and just train somebody who already knows a little bit of marketing, but is in Mexico. And it's definitely, a huge part of at least how I'm planning my business, and I just find it really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I couldn't have, an offshore attorney, you know, going to court right now until we get to the point where all, hearings are virtual, which I don't know that that's going to happen in my lifetime. That just wouldn't be practical. So that would have to be somebody who's geographically, close. There are other things like with our medical records, they deal a lot with health insurance and so forth. And so we talked to the remote team, and we all came to the conclusion that the next medical records person that we needed to hire, and we've already hired her, should probably be a US person because our healthcare system is so different than what there is in other countries. And so it made sense. Now, this person that we just hired for medical records is still remote, but she's, in the US.
Yeah. Yeah, our health system is probably really different from everyone else's in good and bad ways. So what's something that we talked about or we didn't actually get to talk about that you wanna go over a little bit before we close up?
I don't know there's really anything I want to go over, but I thought I would kind of make a joke on myself at the end. And so today I had a client coming in to pick up, an item. And so I had just gotten back from court and I heard somebody in the front office. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go, meet her. And I went out and called her the wrong name. You
Oh no.
So, and then I mean, just totally had a brain freeze, and one of my workers, was sitting there and I knew she wanted to laugh, and the lady looked at me, and then she kind of laughed. And I said, I don't even know what I was thinking. I was like, I literally was just looking at your case and just totally, brain froze. So, note to everyone, when you're going to meet a client, make sure you know their name.
Yeah. I've had to stop myself before with you. It wasn't an issue because I've known you for a while, but before I'm interviewing somebody, I haven't said their name aloud. I have to like say it aloud a few times, otherwise I'll totally butcher it.
Yeah.
You don't know you can pronounce it until you say it aloud.
Right.
So that's what I've
Right.
been. Oh. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for being on the podcast. We had to reschedule because we had this originally scheduled for the moment before a national Zoom outage stopped Zoom. And we just had to completely change schedules that day. But thank you so much for being on and talking with me, taking up some of your Friday. Um, and if somebody wants to look you up, where should they go to find more about you?
Well, first, thanks for having me as well. And so if you want to find us, we're on the web at www.theparishlawfirm.com, or you can find us on Facebook. I think it's Parrish Law Firm. You can find us on Instagram. Thanks to you and Luis, we're pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. And don't forget to follow him on LinkedIn as well. Since we didn't mention that.
Always LinkedIn. Yeah.
I know. Gotta push it. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.